Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 397. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to help support and inspire new trauma workers through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. Thanks so much for joining me today, and here we go. All right, guys, I just want to say that I am thrilled to have this podcast sponsored by CPTSD Foundation.org. A little while ago, I actually got to meet the founder, Athena Moberg of CPTSD Foundation. We met here in San Francisco, sat down, had breakfast, and it was amazing. I got to feel and see her passion, the passion that she has for this work, and not just for therapists and clinicians, but survivors as well. CPTSD Foundation provides peer-led support and adjunctive care in between therapy sessions for survivors of complex trauma. 7 days a week, 365 days a year, survivors can come together to give and receive support and validation and feel equipped with the knowledge and skills they can use every day. You can check it out at CPTSD Foundation.org. Their website is amazing. They have daily recovery support. They have free support groups. They have a healing book club. And Trauma Therapist podcast listeners can get 50% off the first month when they join the daily recovery support calls. You can check that out by going to cptsdfoundation.org/trauma therapist podcast. Once again, that's cptsdfoundation.org/trauma therapist podcast. Or just head on over to the website at traumatherapistpodcast.com and click on the link there, and you'll be in business. Trauma may be a fact of life, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence. Somatic Experiencing is a psychobiological method of addressing clients' physical and emotional trauma conditions and helps to give voice to their experiences without a need for them to retell their story. SE is a complementary modality that focuses on regulation of the nervous system and offers the opportunity to engage, complete, and resolve the body's instinctual responses to traumatic experiences. For more information regarding somatic experiencing and the SE professional training program, please visit www.traumahealing.org. That's www.traumahealing.org. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have back Courtney Armstrong. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. I'm so glad to be here.
So Courtney, as some of you will know, is a licensed professional counselor and nationally board certified fellow in clinical hypnotherapy who specializes in grief and trauma recovery. With a career spanning more than 2 decades, she's the founder of the Institute for Trauma-Informed Hypnotherapy and developed her trauma-informed hypnotherapy approach after studying with numerous trauma experts and helping thousands of clients overcome trauma and grief. Courtney is the author, most recently, of the book Rethinking Trauma Treatment, Attachment, Memory Reconsolidation, and Resilience, as well as the Therapeutic Aha and Transforming Traumatic Grief. In her 20 years of practice, she has helped thousands of clients recover from trauma and experience deep personal transformation. All right, Courtney. Very excited about, well, first of all, congratulations on the book and the success of the book. You're like all over social media and I've been hearing a lot about it. So it's great to have you back here.
Thank you. It's just great. I love what you're doing as always, and I'm excited to help your listeners get some new ideas for things that they can do when helping their clients with attachment, complex trauma, and whatever else we decide we need to focus on today.
Okay. So before we do dive into that, give our listeners, if you can, just kind of a brief nugget. Why this book? Why did you write this book and decide that this book needed to be written?
Well, that's a great question because at the time, I thought there's so many books out there on trauma. Do we really need another book on trauma? But I felt like there's been so many discoveries in the last just even 10 years that have really changed how we treat trauma since you and I were in graduate school. And there wasn't really a book that I found that had pulled a lot of these things together in one place. So I wanted to create a book that kind of highlighted the most recent discoveries, how that's changed how we're treating trauma. We're much more effective at it. and have it in one place. So it could be kind of like an on-the-fly guide you could use no matter what model of trauma therapy you're trained in. I'm really interested in giving people tools that work across models, that looking at what models have in common. And this book also really focuses more on understanding your client's attachment style, because I think trauma therapy, a lot of times we get the impression that it's about reworking all those traumatic memories. But the more I have been in this field and the more research I dove into, I realized the bulk of trauma treatment really goes back to the relationship. And at the end of treatment, I started surveying my clients, and they would consistently tell me, when I asked them what was most helpful, they would say, how you treated me. You know,
Right.
They never really specifically named a technique, or they didn't say, you know, that memory reconsolidation, or that, although I do think all of those techniques we know about and use can help, it really still goes back to how they feel like their connection with you is.
Mm-hmm. So they didn't say, you know, I'm so glad you used Bessel-van-der-Kolk's intervention on page 222. You just nailed that. They didn't say that's you.
They didn't. I was so surprised. Yeah, I mean, you know, and of course, as you mentioned in the intro, you know, I'm trained in hypnosis, is kind of my first love. So I do a lot of hypnotherapy tools to help them with emotional regulation and even with memory reconsolidation. And they love it, but they often didn't even mention that. They would keep going back to, well, you were patient with me. You didn't push me to, you know, change too quickly. You validated that it was normal for me to feel some of the things that I was feeling, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm just, as you're saying that, it just feels so, it just feels right. I mean, we need that. And when you think of people who've been impacted by trauma, that connection, that rapport, that relationship has, in most instances, have been ripped from them.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's dive in here. This whole, the concept, the idea, the topic, the subject of attachment styles. Is this a good place to start? I mean,
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to let you roll with it, because I mean, there are a lot of questions I can ask you, but let's go.
Okay. Well, here's what I started to realize. Number one, I started to realize that even when I'm trained in a lot of models like you are. And so even, you know, I like EMDR, I like some of the somatic models like you're trained in. And I found, you know, it really just depended on the client. Like I found I was using different tools for different clients. And then I started to think about what made me choose this approach rather than that one for different clients. And I started to realize a lot of it boiled down to their attachment style. And even though I didn't always formally assess their attachment style, if we look at those 4 basic attachment styles, and I know it's really basic, and that over time we'll probably expand how we think about attachment styles, but but just for your audience, if we go back to those styles that Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main, Judith Solomon identified: secure attachment, avoidant dismissive attachment, anxious preoccupied attachment or ambivalent attachment, and then the disorganized or unresolved attachment styles. When we're dealing with trauma, especially developmental trauma and complex trauma, they're almost always going to have those insecure attachment styles. And so the avoidance, you know, they're hard. The thing is, they don't teach us this in graduate school, but they're hard to connect with. So your avoidants aren't going to like the touchy-feely stuff. It takes a lot to even bring them into therapy, because they've learned to cut off their feelings. They're compulsively self-reliant. And we can get into a little bit more about each style in a moment. But so they're going to be the type that they like a lot of education first, a lot of me explaining why their nervous system was doing what it was doing to help them feel. They really like to feel back in control of things. So, but you can even feel like you're jockeying for control in the session. But when I started to realize, oh, I'm just dealing with avoidant attachment instead of trying to label it as resistance or narcissism, it began to make so much sense. It was so much easier to work with. Contrast that with anxious attachment. I found they just want to pour everything out. They just want somebody to listen to them. So they're going to be in some ways very different, even though they're going to trust real quickly or idealize you in the beginning and then suddenly get pulled back because they're like, oh gosh, I've revealed too much, because their experience in life has been, sometimes I get what I need emotionally from people, but at some point they're going to reject me or abandon me. So they're going to try to glom on really quickly. And then that rejection and abandonment fear stuff is going to pop up. And then they're going to start, getting defensive with you, or they're really sensitive to criticism, or you find, that they just want to use therapy to complain while you comfort them, But again, some of these clients can look quote unquote borderline or histrionic. And then when I realized, this is just anxious attachment. I don't need to label it with anything else. I just need to realize that's where this is coming from. And when I started talking to them that way and said, I can understand why you would feel this way in relationships. And I would explain to them about attachment theory and how trauma could have impacted that for them. And they were like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And they felt less crazy. And it actually opened the door for us to begin to deal with some of those deeper issues for them without them getting so defensive.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for going through that, and it's really helpful. I mean, you said this is really basic, but I think it's so helpful to have it listed and clarified the way you did. As you were talking, Courtney, I was thinking to myself that when I was seeing clients, oftentimes it was easy for me to feel, maybe this client was being resistant or whatnot. And for me to take that on myself in any number of ways, either a knock on my self-esteem or make me feel like I don't know what the heck I'm doing. But to hear you talk about this and to be aware of it. Well, it's another thing. So how does a clinician, therapist, even begin to notice these things?
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to have them listed so neatly like you did, but it's another to, okay, this is what's going on.
Yeah, starting to pick up on it. I'm going to tell your listeners, I made some little cheat sheets for myself that I would use in sessions, and I'm giving them to you guys too, because they really started to help me, like just hitting some of the highlights of traits that were generally presenting with different attachment styles. Now, they do have formal attachment assessments. And so, you guys can Google adult attachment inventory, for example, is kind of the classic, but it's 20 questions. And even though they're really good questions, it takes about 90 minutes to administer that entire thing. And it's intense. Like, I would not ask all of those questions in one session, because it can really start to bring up some deep trauma for people. But, you can get ideas from that, the AAI, as well as there's another questionnaire I like called the ECR-R, the Emotional Closeness in Relationship Experiences, I think is what they call that. And I can even share a link with you, Guy, where you and your clients can take that online and it'll score it and everything for you. So there's formal assessments like that. But just to give you guys some highlights, I started to you're not always going to have time to do those assessments, but what we've learned from the attachment research is just the way people answer questions about their family of origin often gives you clues, or the way they talk about relationships. So the avoidant clients, what they learned early on is, if I reach out for help, when they were babies, their experience was, if I ask for help, I'm going to be ignored, rejected, or criticized. That was their perception. And keep in mind that I think a lot of parents don't mean to do that. They didn't mean to traumatize them. But what these children learn is, I'm just going to shut that down, do everything myself, not expect help from others. If they get help or ask for help, they feel ashamed immediately. So this is why when you start to work with them in treatment, first of all, they rarely come to therapy unless somebody's insisting they come, or it's really bad. They can't function. They're so depressed or anxious, or they've got an addiction or something. And you'll know because they'll just want to get down to business. They won't want to talk about their family of origin. They won't think that's relevant. When you ask them about it, they'll say it was fine. They act like there's nothing to see here. And they're not trying to hide it. They really don't think there's anything to talk about.
Right.
And it takes them a while to realize, but you'll know because they'll kind of be dismissive of that. They'll be dismissive of you sometimes. Like whenever you offer a suggestion, they'll either tell you like, yeah, I've tried that doesn't work, or they'll one up you like because they feel shame asking you for help or thinking I can't figure it out myself. Like they always have to feel like I'm in control somehow and I'm not stupid. And so when you know that, or when you're picking up on that in a session, I think if you can begin to say, something's happened in this person's life, it's made it hard for them to ask for or receive help. And this isn't personal, but I've got to learn how to dance with it.
Right.
And if you confront it too early before you have some rapport, they'll cut and run. Or if you push them to explore their feelings too quickly. And I know I don't want to go too far because I know that you've interviewed like Robert Mueller on avoidant attachment. You've had a lot of people talk about attachment on your podcast, but I think what I want to bring to your listeners' awareness is some quick ways you can kind of suspect what could be going on, and maybe you explore it further.
Yeah, this is really super helpful. Yeah. What you're doing, yeah.
Okay, so anxious attachment, do you want to go there for a moment?
Sure.
Because I don't want to go too long on each one, but I want to give y'all some nuggets to take away. So anxious or ambivalent attachment, we call it preoccupied as adult because they're always preoccupied with the other person in relationships. Now, I am a recovering anxious attachment style myself. So I'm going to tell you some things about us. We love therapy. So the bulk of your caseload, especially if you're in private practice, these people tend to go to therapy. They love it because it's like it's a dream come true. Someone validating you consistently. Because our experience was, and my parents were not physically abusive to me. So I didn't have big T trauma in that way, but because of a divorce and then their contentiousness after that divorce, and we got a lot of mixed messages, and being young, immature parents, they manipulated us and all this stuff. What I got is sometimes I was validated and supported by each parent, and sometimes I was shamed or criticized for having needs or feelings, and so what the message that they get is they start trying to assess the parent's mood, or in any of their relationships. They're always focusing on what is that other person's mood? What do I need to tell that person to get them to accept me or approve of me or love me or to pay attention to me? And so when you come to therapy, they're usually very engaging. If you ask them about their family of origin, they usually have tons of insight actually into it. Like they can tell you very clearly what was wrong in their family, and it's probably still going on, whatever the drama was.
Wow.
But they're usually going to be in therapy for current relationship or self-esteem issues. And they're going to idealize you in the beginning because you're going to be validating them and you're going to understand them, and that's going to feel so good. And you will feel like, like there's a rapport building pretty quickly with them. However, they're very sensitive to criticism. So when you start to begin to confront them about maybe something they could do differently in a relationship, or, try to help them start to implement a new skill, they can suddenly feel like you're criticizing and rejecting them, and they'll either get angry with you or defensive or no show or try to get your love even more, try to get your approval even more. Like I've had clients suddenly start bringing me, coffee from Starbucks through the session because they think, oh, I got to get back in her good graces. So or it can look really manipulative, like borderline histrionic stuff. Like they start really acting out or getting really angry with you or calling you on the weekends or, saying they're going to kill themselves, or they start to get better, then suddenly they regress because they think you're going to discharge them. So if you realize this is coming from some old experiences where they, and I usually with these clients will start to explore where does this feel familiar to you, where you felt like things were going really good and then something felt like, wait, something just shifted in this relationship. I don't feel so secure anymore.
Yeah. So let me ask you something. So Courtney, are you using this knowledge, say in this last example you're talking about, are you using this knowledge as a doorway to begin to what? Talk about the trauma?
Yeah, thank you.
Trauma?
Yes. I use it as a doorway to begin to explore the root of whatever issue they're dealing with, which is usually some unresolved trauma. And I say that because most of the time these clients will not come to therapy saying, I want to work on trauma. They come saying, I have recurring anxiety or depression or a substance issue or relationship issues. And we can give them some skill. I mean, I always want to stabilize the current problem. So I'm not going to jump into the trauma right away. First, I want to kind of build rapport and stabilize the current issue. But then for long-term relief or improvement, I have found exploring, where did you learn this? Where did you learn this belief or this pattern, and how did it work for you in the past? Ultimately is what is going to give them long-term resolution. And my clients experienced that too, as yours and many of our clients. They begin to realize, wow, I cannot believe how much this experience has affected my life, but when they start to heal it, their self-esteem starts to get better. They start to feel more confident about their ability to manage anxiety or depression or have healthier relationships.
Right. And even to name it, to realize that, because as you're talking, I think the reasons I'm smiling is because I'm like, oh my God, that's me. And oh my God, I don't want to, but this is intense stuff, because you're talking about how we were brought up and raised. And like you said, oftentimes our parents are unaware of this and how screwed us up.
Right.
But this is really just intense. And I love how you're talking about the importance of being able to identify, and I understand nothing is always in these neat little boxes, but what you're providing here, I think, is a really, really good guideline here. So let's continue.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
the one, thank you so much. The one that, the next one I want to talk about is disorganized, unresolved attachment, because with severe trauma, like severe abuse, severe physical abuse or severe neglect, where, of course, in attachment theory, this style evolves when you feel frightened of your caregiver, and what the very person you're supposed to attach to for survival feels like the very person who threatens your survival the most. And maybe they didn't physically abuse the person, maybe the caregivers didn't, but it could just be an alcoholic parent that raged, or they abused the spouse. And even if you were not abused physically as a child, just being in a household with that kind of scary violence can create this, or just intense neglect, where you just feel like there's nobody here really ensuring my safety. So what happens with these clients is, and I would say, the literature says that even though it's only 5 to 10% of the population, the literature says it could be, as much as 80% of clients who've had childhood abuse and neglect, like intense.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in the therapeutic relationship, and there's not as clear a stereotype I could describe, but the hallmark I would say with these clients is they're suspicious. And they will come to therapy because they often struggle with anxiety and depression, and they often feel confused about their identity. Like they can shift, they can look DID, but they're not always going to be dissociative identity disorder. But they can shift real quickly, like, and say there's a part of me that just gets so angry and rages and does things that I never thought I would do, like my parents. And then there's a part of me that's so like timid that'll just freeze and lock up. Like what's happening, Guy, I started to realize, and this, I've really got a lot of this insight from Janina Fisher, who I know has been on your podcast, that they're shifting between survival modes, like Janina Fisher says, we can think of parts in terms of there's a fight part, there's an attach part, there's a fear or flight part that wants to escape, there's a freeze part, there's a submit part. So parts work can actually be really effective with these clients. So, whether you like internal family systems or you use another approach to parts work, I found that these clients they often do feel very fragmented. And that what we know now, and what I also talk about in the book, is developmentally, we can explain that now with what we've understood from neuroscience, that if there's a lot of trauma before the age of 8, the way your brain's developed at that time will prevent them from creating like an explicit, coherent narrative or memory. They are more prone to dissociation because usually that's how they had to cope, is to go into freeze submit. So for these clients that have more of a disorganized attachment style, you can feel them wanting to connect with you, but also being very fearful or suspicious, and trust takes much longer to build with them. And I have found that generally they're cooperative in therapy. Like you don't feel like with the avoidant, it's more like there's a lot of pride and they kind of jockey for control. That this client, you can still feel resistance, but it's more guarded out of fear and I'm not sure I can trust you yet. And they can also seem more fragile emotionally, but I will tell you, they're strong. They're tough as nails in another way because they have lived through so much.
Right.
And these clients, even though they will acknowledge trauma in their history when you ask about it, they usually either don't want to talk about it because they will say things like, I don't want to talk about it because I'll start having nightmares and it'll start bringing all that stuff up again. Or they'll say, I don't have clear memories. They're fragmented. So usually when we need to do a more preparation with them in terms of how to help them stay present and not relive the trauma I've found, before we get them to start talking about it. And in terms of building rapport with them, I find they also do really well with education about what their nervous system is doing or how the brain stores traumatic memories. So they feel less crazy and fragmented, and helping them understand, even though it feels like mood swings or different parts of yourself, it makes sense based on different survival strategies that worked for you at different times in your life. And of course, some people in this category will have DID, will have dissociative identity disorder. And, and you may not know that right away either, because sometimes they don't realize it or they're not sure they can tell you. And I think the message for us as therapists is that they need us to just be patient with them. They need to move slower in therapy. And so even though we might say, oh gosh, I really want to help this person resolve these traumas, I know it could really help them, they often aren't so eager to explore it and need us to pace with them a little more before they're ready to get into it. And the other thing I've learned from these clients is that the therapeutic relationship is definitely the most healing aspect for them. These clients have consistently told me, I've never had like a relationship with a person that I felt like I could trust, or when I've had like a misunderstanding with these clients or made a therapeutic mistake, but I hung in there for us to work through it. And even
Right.
if they fired me, they've often said, I never knew before that you could actually work through a conflict with somebody. And that was,
Yeah, that's so amazing. I mean, I know that, people talk about that, but just to hear you talk about that is it's so intense and it's so heavy. But at the same time, it's beautiful.
it is. I mean, I've learned so much from these survivors that I've worked with, and also they like with that disorganized too. They can often feel so unsure of themselves and incompetent, but they usually have some. They're usually super creative and have some strengths. The other thing I've learned with them is I get them to tell me something they're an expert at, so that we kind of level the playing field.
Right.
Sometimes they will be real submissive, because that's how they had to cope with abuse. Like they see you as an authority figure, and they may, have trouble making eye contact. And so I also try to find somewhere where I want them to tell me something you're an expert at, or if I hear something like one of my clients built sailboats, and like I said, that is fascinating. And I said, bring in some pictures. I want to hear all about that. And that really finally opened her up, where she had been so guarded and quiet. And she wanted to be there, but it was just so hard for her to talk. And when I invited her to tell me something she was an expert at, that really started to bring her out of her shell. And
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Courtney Armstrong. Her most recent book is titled Rethinking Trauma Treatment, Attachment, Memory Reconsolidation, and Resilience. Courtney, man, we can go on and on and on. This is crazy. So obviously the book, what we're talking about here is the tip of the iceberg in the book. But so who's this book for? Who's it targeted
Well,
for?
I really see it as appropriate from the beginning therapist to seasoned therapist. The beginning therapist, I think it helps them feel like here's a lot of the basic tools that you need to be able to work with trauma, that you can refer to when you need a resource. In the memory reconsolidation section, I give you ideas for working with different types of trauma, like things that I've seen work with sexual trauma, childhood abuse. It's divided in a chapter by which kind of trauma it is, combat trauma, attachment trauma. Because one of the things I would hear when I would do workshops from young therapists is, well, I don't know how to treat trauma yet, or I have to go get training in this before I can do it. And I thought, I didn't want people to feel that way. Here's some things to get you started where you feel like you have some kind of, working knowledge of what to do. But in terms of even more seasoned therapists, it really goes back to how to create a corrective emotional experience in a session.
Mm-hmm.
And my intention is to not only give you some new ideas, but also to validate for us that a lot of what we do intuitively is probably right on the mark. Like we get the idea to do something or not to do something. And I wanted to validate for therapists that the neuroscience is actually supporting what we've intuitively known as therapists, that the brain heals, that the parts of the brain, what it is now showing is that attachment provides the buffer, so that even if you've been through trauma as a kid, if you had secure attachment with at least one or two people, it will actually buffer some of the impact of the trauma so that your brain can develop normally. And when I talk about that, I mean development in terms of secure attachment helps you develop the networks you need to know how to regulate your emotions, self-soothe, feel like safe in the world, like you matter and belong, that kind of stuff. And we can now see on brain scans where kids who don't have that have trouble with learning, memory, relationships, understanding people's intentions. So what happens is because of neuroplasticity, we've learned that you can develop those areas. So it's not like a lifelong sentence. If you've been through that as a young person, you can recover that development in your brain and build those networks. But it starts with having a secure attachment with somebody. And so I want you to know, even as a therapist, when you don't feel like you think, gosh, I don't know if I'm helping this person. I'm just sitting here listening to them and trying to validate them. That's actually you're starting to model what a secure attachment feels like.
Right.
And help. And that is, I'm not going to say you're going to rewire their brain but over time that is beginning to help their brain develop those networks that they didn't get. They're beginning to get the sense of but in the beginning, it won't feel comfortable to them sometimes because they'll be suspicious. Like, why are you being so nice to me? Right. What's on the other end of this thing,
I think, you're talking about this, the importance of creating rapport and providing corrective experience. I think that's a great topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
It's something seemingly so simple.
Right.
Like we throw around that we'll just build rapport or building rapport. But anyway, we can talk about that later. Courtney, I want to thank you so much for coming on here. Again, the book is Rethinking Trauma Treatment, Attachment, Memory, Reconsolidation, and Resilience. Where can people find you and the book?
Well, my new website is realworldtherapy.com because what I'm wanting to build over there is resources for therapists, like how this looks in the real world, and what to do when it doesn't go as planned. So that's what we've got coming up over there. But if you go to Real World Trauma Therapy, you can download some cheat sheets about what we talked about today. If you go to my resources and then click on Rethinking Trauma cheat sheets, I've got cheat sheets for attachment style and how to work with memories, and also a coupon code, a 20% discount on the book. Nice. If you download that packet, you get there at the back of it is a coupon from my publisher Norton. And you get 20% off free shipping on the book. So
okay, I'll have that linked up at the show notes page. Yeah. And I also see here that you offer consultation and coaching.
Yeah,
very, very cool. Courtney, always a pleasure. I want to thank you so much for inspiring this podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks. You've been such an inspiration to me and all your listeners. So happy to be here.
All right, take care.
Take care.
Foundation for Human Enrichment, DBA Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute, is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to resolving trauma worldwide by providing professional training and education in somatic experiencing. It was founded by Dr. Peter Levine, author of Waking the Tiger, who developed somatic experiencing based on explorations of how animals deal with threat and traumatic experiences on a daily basis. Learn more about somatic experiencing and the SE professional training at www.traumahealing.org. That's www.traumahealing.org. All right, guys, I just want to say that I am thrilled to have this podcast sponsored by CPTSD Foundation.org. A little while ago, I actually got to meet the founder, Athena Moberg of CPTSD Foundation. We met here in San Francisco, sat down, had breakfast, and it was amazing. I got to feel and see her passion, the passion that she has for this work, and not just for therapists and clinicians, but survivors as well. CPTSD Foundation provides peer-led support and adjunctive care in between therapy sessions for survivors of complex trauma. 7 days a week, 365 days a year, survivors can come together to give and receive support and validation and feel equipped with the knowledge and skills they can use every day. You can check it out at CPTSDFoundation.org. Their website is amazing. They have daily recovery support. They have free support groups. They have a healing book club. And Trauma Therapist podcast listeners can get 50% off the first month when they join the daily recovery support calls. You can check that out by going to CPTSDFoundation.org/Trauma Therapist podcast. Once again, that's CPTSDFoundation.org/Trauma Therapist podcast. Or just head on over to the website at traumatherapistpodcast.com and click on the link there, and you'll be in business.